and welcome to the Seattle Storytellers Guild StoryFest for October. And so I've seen our first teller at Ghost Story concerts and also at our Holler Lake venue over the years, and I have always been amazed and even stunned at the stories that she's brought to us. Jo Walter has retired just recently from the teaching profession. She has inspired and taught people from high school to preschool. And she's always aspired to inspire imagination with the spoken word, with her stories. And I think that we're going to be inspired tonight with stories you won't believe. Please welcome Jo Walter.
Thanks, Judith, and thanks for the hands, and kind of nice in this different environment. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming tonight. The timing is great. After last week, I know lots of you were at the Forest Festival. It's nice to see faces of people that I saw there and also heard tell last weekend when I got my kind of annual dose of storyteller soul nurturing. One of the things that came out from that weekend was that good feeling about song in story. I have a couple of stories that are just sung stories. And I thought, well, I'm going to just stick a little song in with this one tonight. It's a gardening story, what I'm going to tell you, but the song is one that I sang with preschoolers and with campers, elementary age campers, on a farm camp that I organized for a dozen years in the summer. The garden song, Inch by Inch. I loved that I could, use music to teach kids, about gardening, about how things grow, about sustainability, about healthy food, about measuring. We'd get out our rulers and how long is an inch, and we'd figure it out because we were going to show, inch by inch as we sing the song. So we learned about inches and, even smaller, what's a centimeter, what's a millimeter, and why is it important? Because things grow slowly. We need patience to work in gardens and to understand plants. Things don't happen like that. So the song is inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow, gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rains come tumbling down. So there's my musical contribution for tonight. It kind of brings back all these jolly memories of the work that I'm not doing anymore. There will be other ways that I can do these kinds of songs that have hand gestures with others who aren't preschoolers. So my story is about me as a gardener and a neighbor of mine who kind of broke my heart by telling me that I wasn't a good neighbor. And it makes no sense because, as a preschool teacher, someone who spent lots of time with children as my work, I would still be a person who would volunteer. If there was a sick kid in the neighborhood who needed a babysitter, I would do that in an emergency. And, when we had our annual block party and we closed off the street with sawhorses on either end of the block, and we'd have music and dancing and storytelling and games, good food. I would be the one who, even though we only had to bring one dish, I would always bring two. My fennel and leek salad was very popular, fresh from my garden. Everybody would rave about my mushroom casserole. Doesn't that make me a good neighbor? Well, apparently, David, who lived next door, didn't feel that way. I would say it started with the leaves in the autumn, that first autumn that he lived next door. I love the change of seasons. I love the colors. I love even the browns. I like the golds and I like the reds. But in that time of year, I'm very busy because all of those leaves, everything that's in my garden has some sort of value outside of being a beautiful plant in my garden. There are things to be done with them, helpful things. And I would gather them up and save them, dry them in my pantry and save them for who knew what kind of use they might have. In that time of year too, that's when the corn gets ripe and the corn husks, you can turn them into corn dollies. I bet some of you have made them, and they're good luck. I always save up the corn stalks and put them in a bunch, put them over my doorway just to bring luck to the house during the season. And I thought of it. David and his wife Amy next door, they have a newborn, and I thought that maybe I would send some good luck corn over to them, but I didn't know them well enough. And some people they think that idea of luck coming through special means, it makes them uncomfortable. And so I didn't want to rock the boat. And this is my way of being a good neighbor, not bringing them what I thought I naturally would, the corn, but okay. It was frustrating to me to watch this person whose gardening style was so entirely different than mine. Like, for example, in the fall, leaves fall from the trees. It's the natural thing that leaves do. And who would have a problem with such a thing? Only David, my neighbor. My Japanese maple, a maple so beautiful that strangers walking down the street would stop and talk over the fence to say, what a lovely specimen that is. And it was fully in my yard, but there were some parts of the branches that were sticking out over the cedar fence that separated our properties. And of course, in the fall, the leaves would fall like they do, and he didn't like that. And I would rake them up and put them into piles. And sometimes I would get busy with other projects and I would forget to put them into bags, and maybe the wind would blow and maybe some of them would like blow over to his side through the slats or maybe under the fence. And what would he do? I actually saw him get out one of those noisy weed blowers, the leaf blowers, and from his side he would blow the fallen leaves back over to my side. It's ridiculous. I mean, he's the kind of a person whose yard it's so perfect. There's nothing in it that has not been put there on purpose by him or his wife. The lawn, he mows the lawn in the green season in the spring and in the summer twice a week. And if it rains a little extra and there's, a few extra centimeters of growth, he'll be out there mowing a third time. And he loves any kind of tool he can get. And those annoying, loud, motorized kind of gardening tools. He's got leaf blower, weed whacker, chainsaw, He's got hedge trimmer. It seems that unless he has spent some money on some special tool, well, it's not worthy of, or the work isn't worthy of doing in his garden. The lawn is just perfect. Every shrub, every bush is not marred in any way by any unsightly little branch sticking out from the perfect shape that he has sculpted from the bush. It just, I think that maybe, he doesn't have enough control of other things in his life. And so what he's doing is trying to, exert his dominance over Mother Nature. And it's awful. It's terrible. Now, my yard is nothing like his, yet it's beautiful. My yard is welcoming. My yard does, in fact, have weeds in it, and I welcome them. If the weed has come to me, that means that it's volunteered to be in my yard, and it is my job to find out what is its value, what is it bringing to me in my yard. I guess where did he begin that problem with the leaves blowing through? And that was the Japanese maple. And the first seriously bad thing that happened with him, where I felt like it's not okay, was when I heard him outside. And he was working with a handsaw. I was inside. I was just making some casserole. There was a sick kid in the neighborhood, and good neighbor me was helping out the family. And I hear this, and it's him with a handsaw, and he is helping himself. He hadn't asked me about it. Like, would it be okay if he did some trimming? It was true that tree, the Japanese maple, was needing some trimming. I don't hold that part against him, that it was time. But if he had spoken to me, that would have been the neighborly thing to do. I went and I asked him, I tried to be as pleasant as possible and not trying to pick a fight. Just, what are you doing? And he explained that the Japanese maple was reaching over into his yard, and it was scratching the top of his truck. I thought, your truck, your utility vehicle? It wasn't damaging anything. It was touching the top of his truck. But I just said, okay, and went inside, left it alone, thanked him for helping me with the trimming. What came next? The fruitless mulberry. Now, a fruitless mulberry, what that means is that it doesn't ripen. It doesn't, the fruits on it, they don't get juicy and thick and soft and purple. They fall off the tree while they're still hard and green, and they are enjoyed by the chipmunks and the squirrels. And they don't stain, and they just kind of bounce off the car. They don't do any damage. And I discover him hacking away at the fruitless mulberry, and I ask about it, and he says that it's too messy, and I suggest that, well, it's good for the animals. This is a perfect example of kind of biodegradable. It lands on the ground. It doesn't make a mess. It breaks down. It turns into compost on its own. So what was the problem? I tried to be nice about it, but I'm sure my attitude was coming through. My husband had been away during this mulberry episode on a business trip. And when he came back, I told him about what was happening with the neighbor. And I couldn't get a lot of satisfaction out of my husband. He just kind of shrugged and said, well, some people are like that, and that's what you got to deal with when you've got neighbors. I was disappointed in him. And so I just kind of walked away while he was checking the mail, and I looked across, like from my dining room, I could look across the yards and see what was happening in their window. and I had the lights out, and I was just watching, and there they were, having their dinner, and then they all sat on this kind of oriental rug in the living room, and Amy, David's wife, was sitting with the baby, and it was pleasant. And 9 o'clock comes, and they bring the baby upstairs, and after a little while, the lights were out, and I was, left to figure out, what can I do about this? It's not okay for this neighbor to be doing this damage to my plants, and my husband wasn't going to be any help. And so I thought about it. A couple of days went by, and the neighborhood stayed pretty quiet. It had been quiet since there was a family that lived across the street, and they had this little boy with kind of like piggy eyes, and he used to practice his trumpet. He would practice his trumpet at all hours of the day and night, and they had moved. After that little boy went blind, the whole family moved in order to be closer to the school for the blind that he was going to be attending. And I'll tell you, there wasn't anybody in the neighborhood who was particularly sad to see them go. My garden, with nobody watching me from across the street, I was left with, complete privacy to do my thing in my garden. I'm so proud of it. It's very large, very complete. I could sit out there, and my cats, I have two, one black and one white, they'd be out there with me, kind of poking around in my herb beds and my flower beds, along with the squirrels. And I grow everything. I don't know if any of you are gardeners, but like chamomile is wonderful for patients who are coming home from the hospital. It just brings, you have it in tea. We think of it as the relaxing herb, but it also is a vitalizing herb, and it brings strength and energy to healing patients. Carnation is another one. If you take some of those petals and you sprinkle it around the foundation of your house, it will help to protect you against any spells or curses that have been cast on you or your family. Marigold, too, that's another one. If you have had bad dreams, marigold around the bedroom will keep those bad dreams from coming true. Basil, more than just for cooking. You can make love incenses with ground basil, sachets. Rue, very simple, you take the rue and you just slap it on your forehead, your headache goes away. All of the things that grow in my garden, the trees, the ash, the birch, the willow, all the fruit trees, I mean, everything's got a use. The bark, the wood, the leaves, the roots. I just welcome all of it. I spend a lot of time in my garden doing the harvesting. And then there's the drying the things, and the grinding the things, and the mixing things together. I've got shelves full of recipe books with instructions for how to make various concoctions, helpful things. Yeah. Well, my husband was gone again, and the third big event happened with my neighbor, David. He was, one morning, very loud. It woke me up. I missed the part about his wife and how she, before this big event at David's, his wife came over. And Amy, I'd never hardly spoken to her. Just she'd come and go, in her driveway, hi and goodbye, and that was it with her. But one day she came over and she said, "Oh, do you mind? I hope I'm not bothering you." And I was down harvesting rosemary, I think it was. And I looked up, and of course you're not bothering me, but it was unusual to see her. And I stood up and kind of got the dirt off my jeans. And she said, "Well, I don't mean to be rude, but I wonder if you couldn't see to trimming that big tree over there. And she was pointing to the black walnut. And the black walnut, well, it had some leaves at the second story level, some branches that were sticking out quite a lot over on her side, and then some down lower that were kind of reaching over. And it was another beautiful tree. And she wanted them trimmed. And I said, well, is there a problem? And she said, yes, it's dripping sap on my car. And the problem is that I need to bring it into the car wash a couple of times a week. And it's actually on the glass on my windows. And when I try and roll the windows down, it sticks. And I looked over at her driveway, which was wide enough to put 4 cars, next to each other. And on the edge where there was a little bit of sap dripping, this like one time a year, it's not all year long, but this little bit of sap, she couldn't just move the car over a couple of feet in order to avoid the sap. She wants to cut the tree. And so I just smiled at her and said, gee, that's got to be rough, taking the car to the car wash. And she suggested, well, maybe you want to talk to your husband about that. That was a wrong thing to say. I just felt like, is she telling me that, little housewife that I am, I can't make this decision about whether or not it's a good idea for her to hack some branches off my black walnut? And so I just gave her a smile and I said, well, thank you. Thank you very much for letting me know about that. And I went about my business and she went away. Well, that was when I heard from David. And it was one morning, I'm sound asleep, and I hear this big racket of a noise. And I'm, disoriented. And I'm like, is it a dream? Where is it coming from? And it was coming from close. I jumped up out of bed. I look out the window. And there is David. He has rented a truck. He has got some kind of big rig that's got an arm, this kind of articulated arm that has a cherry picker at the top, one of those baskets that you sit in and it can take you up and down. Well, he had rented this rig in order to use a chainsaw on my black walnut tree. And I lost it. I went running down the stairs, and I'm barefoot. I'm half dressed. I'm out on my porch. My face is red. I'm spluttering. There's the loud roar of the engine on the truck. And then there's the chainsaw sounds. And I'm trying to shout up to him and say, what are you doing? And he took a while and looked down at me, from his position high up above me, definitely with an advantage. He turns off the chainsaw and he calmly says, well, we told you that we wanted that tree to be trimmed and you didn't do it, so I'm taking care of it. And I said, what is the problem? All you need to do is move the car. You've got so much room. These were not the best responses to him, but I was out of my mind. What was he doing? And he said that, he was kind of like a petulant teenager. I'm freaking out. And he says, well, I should be able to park my car wherever I want to in my own driveway. And I just like, what is wrong with you, David? You don't like leaves. You don't like branches. You don't like mulberries. What is it? What's wrong with you? And he just said, look, it's my driveway. I don't want sap. I don't want leaves. I don't want mulberries. And he fires up the chainsaw again. And there was nothing for me to do. I stood there feeling the pain each time one of those branches would get cut and come crashing down through the rest of them. I would flinch inside. It was like, this is terrible, but it felt like watching one of your children suffer some kind of mutilation in front of you, and there's nothing that I could do. And so I went inside, sat down. I could watch what he was doing through the window. And finally, he packed up, he got finished. I heard the truck leave. And I go outside. And I stood on the property line where I could see both his and my side of the fence. And on my side, there's a beautiful, healthy, lush, walnut-filled tree. But then on the other side, nothing was penetrating his private airspace. I got close to that tree and I wrapped my arms around the trunk of the tree. I did not care what anybody in the neighborhood was going to think about it. And I put my cheek up against the bark and I couldn't hear anything, but I swear I could feel that tree screaming in pain. I went back inside and I sat down and I looked out the window and morning became afternoon and I didn't move. Afternoon became night. I still didn't move. I see he comes home. I'm looking at the activities in his house. I watch them have dinner. I watch them go to bed. I watch the lights go out. I go upstairs into my own bed. The cats cuddled up with me, but it wasn't much comfort. I couldn't sleep the whole night. The next morning, I got up early. I went to my cookbooks and I found the recipe I was looking for. I spent hours baking that day. And when I was done, I had a loaf of bread that I could bring over to Amy. She was very glad to receive it. She felt like, oh, okay, that's neighborly. We're not feuding. It was just a big relief to her, and she promised that they were going to have it for dinner that night. So I went home, and I looked out my window, and I waited for David to come home. And I watched them have their dinner. And I watched them slice the bread. And I watched them eat the bread. And I watched them finish dinner, sit down, watch a little TV while Amy was nursing the baby. And then I watched them go upstairs and the lights went out. I waited a little while to give them time to settle in. And then I got down my little backpack and I put into it some chicory that I had gathered at midnight on the previous Midsummer's Eve. I'd cut it with a golden knife, especially for the purpose I'd need it this night. I also put in my little backpack a little vial of liquid, and I went next door. I took out the chicory and I rubbed it on the door. When I rubbed it on the door, I listened for the little click of the lock unlocking. The chicory fell from the door. There wasn't very much. It wasn't going to be noticed. I went inside, had a little flashlight, and I very quietly stepped in, trying to avoid any creaking floorboards. There was maybe one little creak, but no sounds coming from upstairs. I went up the stairs, stood outside of their door, and all I could hear was quiet breathing. I knew they'd stay asleep. The celery seed in the bread took care of that. I went inside and I looked through the window in their bedroom, right over to the window in my bedroom next door. And there were the cats looking at me. I gave a little wave. They gave a little blink. And I leaned over the bed to see if I could find what I needed. and it wasn't hard. She had long blonde hair, and he had short brown hair. And so I was able to take 3 little hairs of his and put them in a little pouch that I brought just to hold the hair. And I left their room, shut the door, and went into the nursery. I walked inside, and my flashlight shone on the baby's face. The baby looked up at me, all trusting, little smile on its face. And I took out that little vial of holly water, and I sprinkled it all around that baby's body. That would keep her safe. She looked up at me, a little spit bubble formed on her lips. She popped it, and she went back to sleep. Well, I left, went downstairs, made sure that the door was locked, and I went home and went to bed. Slept pretty good. The following morning, at sunrise, I went downstairs to look at the black walnut. I took one of those hairs out of the pouch, and I found a wound that was right at eye level. I could see the tree's lifeblood, the sap, just coming out of that wound. I took the hair and I pressed it into the sap, and my work was done. I could see it trickle kind of millimeter by millimeter right over that hair. And I went inside, and things were quiet for a couple days. And after a while, I started to hear some yelling, some shouting coming from David and Amy's house. I would hear Amy kind of crying and sobbing. He was yelling at his wife and his baby, and I knew the baby was safe. He would also find things in the house and start pitching them out the front door. There'd be towels, there'd be toothbrushes, there'd be pots and pans, there'd be there was a mantle clock that he threw out there, and she would come out and she would be picking everything up and looking around and hoping nobody could see. He would be out on the lawn stark naked, and she would have to come and bring him back inside the house, looking around, embarrassed as could be. And when I would see her, I would kind of hang back in the dark as I looked out the window. I didn't want to add to her humiliation at all. So it got worse when he was in home at night and the nights were warm enough that the windows could be left open. We could hear everything. And sometimes there'd be Amy pleading, or sometimes Amy would be on the phone, maybe with her mother, talking about what can I possibly do. And other times you would hear him maybe babbling, maybe whimpering like a baby, maybe yelling, maybe making these kind of snuffling noises like an animal eating out of a trough. And it was terrible to listen to. And I knew that it wouldn't go on forever. And one night recently, I went out just to have a look at that wound on the black walnut. And enough time had passed that the weeping, the sap had stopped. And now there was bark that had almost completely grown over the wound. And almost all of that hair had been brought into the tree and was now part of the tree. I saw that and I knew soon. It's an old spell, this one. It goes that if you take the hair of your enemy and you put it into the wound of a tree, when that wound heals over, your friend, your enemy, will be slowly and steadily made mad. Just think about it. The pressure in the skull as the brain is ever so slowly squeezed until he's lost his mind and he has no idea why this is happening to him. But I know. He butchered my tree. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. Happy Halloween.
Oh my, wow. I think we need a break. Wow. Imagination that Joe aspires to inspire has taken us someplace very strange. So if you need a glass of water or a few deep breaths, we're not serving any refreshments here tonight, but we'll just have a minute and then maybe a few announcements and our second teller.